Yo, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Jeff Ketchum. That's Anwar Richardson. We are KA, and you can do us a solid by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell, get all the notifications so that you never miss anything. Today, we're talking about the quarterback battle between Bryce Young and Quinn Ewers leading into Saturday's Texas-Alabama game, which weirdly, the entire nation is completely fixated on, which it's just strange to me. It's been a while since the Longhorns have played in a game that the entire nation is watching. Says a lot, though, I guess, when you're playing the number one team in the country. Anwar, it's impossible to get away from the elements of the Bryce Young versus Quinn Ewers showdown, if you will. They don't play against each other, but they do play against each other. And for us, the conversation comes down to, I think, what level of play must Quinn Ewers reach in order to give the Longhorns a chance to make this a four-quarter game against Alabama and maybe even put them in a position to win it?
Yeah, Catch. When I start thinking about that battle, and like you said, they don't face each other, but having to go toe to toe, I kind of harken back to that LSU game when I start thinking of Sam Ellinger going against Joe Burrow, right? And it's a certain degree that OU game, Catch, when they played against Kyler Murray, and basically having to stand toe to toe. And, one of the things that us going into that game that we talked about was going to be which quarterback blinked first. And the quarterback that blinked first would probably be the one that ended up losing. And that's what happened as relates. Sam Ellinger played a nearly perfect game, probably one of the best games of his college career, I would say. And then we would have to rank it, Catch, with the LSU performance, because from a huge standpoint, maybe stat wise he's done better, but being able to carry a team on his back, like to me, Catch, when I think about this battle, that's what that means, going toe to toe with arguably the number one quarterback in the land that person's season.
Yeah, I mean, Ellinger had a few of these. The two games against Kyler Murray, the game against Georgia, and obviously the LSU game is the one that sticks out in my head the most. He didn't play against Joe Burrow, but he went toe-to-toe with Joe Burrow. Whether or not they had to stop each other or not, sometimes it does just come down to which quarterback's making more plays. It's a little bit of a good news, bad news deal with Bryce Young, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. If you go back and you look at last season's games, the scary thing is at four different times he posted a 200-plus quarterback rating, which is kind of otherworldly. So, like to give you an example of what that would look like, he had a game against Arkansas where he went 31 of 40 for 559 yards and 5 touchdowns. That'll get you a 236 game rating. And he has a number of those. He had 3 other games last year where he went over 170. So half the games he played last season, he played at a level that would probably have him in, it's extremely high, extremely high. Those numbers would represent the highest single season quarterback rating that any quarterback at Texas has ever produced. You go back to Colt McCoy's junior season in 2008, his season quarterback rating was like 170. And Bryce Young did that in games half the times last year. The good news is Bryce didn't do that in every game last year. You go back and you look at the national championship game against Georgia. He had a 115 quarterback rating. He was human against Cincinnati in the championship game or in the semifinal game with a 143 quarterback rating. At Auburn, that was a 4 overtime game, and he only had a 110 quarterback rating. When you look at the games that Bryce Young struggled, and I'll use that loosely, it usually occurred in games where teams, Texas A&M, for example, he only had a 139.4 quarterback rating. If you've got a big, impactful defense, even against Alabama, you can throw Bryce Young off based on what we saw a year ago. The problem is there aren't a lot of teams in college football that have the kind of personnel to, basically stand toe-to-toe with Alabama and give them problems. It makes me think back to this past weekend's performance by the Longhorns. Are they at a place physically and talent-wise where they can really give Alabama some problems? On that side of the game with that quarterback, that's the big question. Because if the answer is yes, you're probably able to keep Bryce Young under control to a certain extent. Like, you're not just letting him put video game numbers up. I just don't know that we know enough about this Texas defense yet to say it's the type of it's like Cincinnati. I'm not even going to mention Georgia, but it's like Cincinnati or Auburn or even Texas A&M a year ago, where they were able to create problems because they've got enough talent on the defensive side of the ball to hold Alabama at bay.
I mean, here's the other challenge to that, though, Catch. Because everything you said is true, but here's an interesting stat to read from you. This comes from the Alabama side, all right? They touted Bryce against the best, and it said Bryce Young elevated his game each time a team appeared on a Crimson Tide schedule a season ago. Here's their stat: in 6 games against teams ranked in the CFP 25. They say Young posted an NCAA passer rating of 157.56. And then when they talk about him against the best defenses, Catch, they go in last year in 7 games against the nation's top 50 pass defense. So they went Georgia, that was twice, Cincinnati, which was number 4, Texas A&M, which was ranked 9, Florida at 39, Ole Miss at 40, and Tennessee at 50. They say Bryce Young accounted for 2,192 yards, which was an average of 313 yards a game, 17 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions with a completion percentage of 63.7. So
does it say what his overall quarterback rating was?
It did not say what his overall quarterback rating was in that note.
Probably lower than what because like I said, last year, the national championship game, Georgia forced him into a 114. So good defenses, good pass defenses, as you would expect, do better than poor pass defenses. What is Texas bringing to the table on Saturday? I'm not sure, because the Louisiana-Monroe game didn't provide enough of a pressure point for that secondary for us to get an idea of, oh boy, these guys have really improved. We'll start to find that out on Saturday. If Texas can limit Bryce Young to the numbers that you just mentioned, then this Texas defense this year, I think, has a chance to be really good. I mean, maybe top 50 nationally when we're talking about pass defense. I almost shudder to think what the numbers were for Bryce Young against top 50 pass defenses, because at that point, the numbers get a bit absurd.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm looking up something right now. Hold on one second, Catch. I'm looking up where Utah State was ranked last season. So Utah State was ranked 77th in the country last season from a defensive standpoint compared to where Texas was at 100. Now, last year's last year, and so I know people like to see, it's a clean slate, so we'll go with that. But if we look at what Bryce Young did against Utah State, Catch, if that's any kind of barometer, yeah, I mean, when you talk about what Quinn Ewers needs to do, it's the whole, you might slow him down, but you can't hold him. You're not going to stop Bryce Young, to the bigger point, right? You're not going to stop him. You're not going to stop this all.
Unless you're Georgia.
Correct. And I don't know if any of us are willing to say Texas defense equals to Georgia defense. So because we're going to probably put them 2 notches below, or we'll put them down where where they are.
Do we think that this Texas pass defense at the end of the year will be ranked in the nation's top 50? I mean, I don't know, but I'm certainly not jumping towards it. Yes.
I mean, we can't judge it off of ULM,
but no, we can't. But I don't know. But most of the players that are on this year's pass defense were a member of last year's pass defense, with the exception of Ryan Watts, and you move a few pieces around, but these were all guys that were heavily involved last season. Obviously, Deshaun Jameson at corner. Anthony Cook was a nickelback a year ago, but now he's a starting safety. Jahdae Barron. I mean, Jalen Gilbo is, I guess, a new member of that secondary, and his presence shouldn't be underrated. I guess the question comes down to this for me. Before we know what we need to ask of Quinn Ewers, we need to know what we expect of Bryce Young. And if you had to project at this point, Anwar, what kind of statistical ballpark are we talking about for Bryce Young? You can't use at this point what the really good teams, I think, did against him last year, because Texas, to this point, hasn't proven that they belong in that territory. I don't know that you go to the extreme and say, well, who are the worst defenses he played against? So it feels like it's some middle ground in those other games is probably a realistic thing to do, which makes me think you're probably talking about a game where he's around 175 quarterback rating at a minimum, and, probably accountable for 3 or 4 touchdowns as a baseline.
Yeah, I'm going through. I'm trying. I would love to. I was trying to get up some of his stats from last season. I mean, from an average standpoint, Catch. I mean, he averaged 324 from a passing yards perspective. 167 passer rating. So, I mean, that's probably on par for what you would expect going into it. I mean, I don't. It'd probably take an injury of some sorts, or defense is playing out of its mind to make that, have. I mean, can you foresee a scenario where he has less than 300 passing yards in this game?
Not at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, kudos to the Longhorn defense if this ends up being a game. The best way to assure that, for me, that this game stays close is you just don't let the best player in the country dictate it on his terms. So if you're able to keep him below 300, you're forcing Alabama at that point to get more offense out of its running game, which is good, but I don't know that they've proven to be great yet. We talked about this yesterday on our Monday Overreaction show. The Texas offense, the Alabama offense, its big question mark is with its offensive line. Texas feels good about its defensive line. They think that's the strength of their defense. If Alabama's forced into a place where they've got to run the ball, you would hope that that's right up where Texas wants to be able to get its business done. I think, you're hopeful that you can play on those terms, and then you perform well if played on those terms. But if we go with a 175-ish type performance, which was, on the whole, Bryce Young played 14 games, and over the course of the season, his quarterback efficiency rating was 175.5. So that's his average performance over the course of the season, which is kind of what we're projecting in this ball game as kind of a baseline for him. What has to happen for Quinn Ewers to be able to produce a similar stat line to help make this a fourth quarter game?
Yeah, it's a good question because, look, Catch, I'm looking at the Alabama Texas A&M line for Bryce Young. That was 28 of 48 for 369, 3 touchdowns, and a 139.4 passer rating. So, not the 200s that, you have mentioned. So definitely more human-like, where he's completing about half of his passes. So, yeah, to me, from a Quinn perspective, I definitely think that, if you're telling me Quinn is at 300 right now and at least 3 touchdowns, I would say, all right, this team's probably got a shot, at that point of keeping it close. And because then I'm adding in Bijan scoring, right? I'm adding in other guys. I'm adding in Roshan potentially scoring. So, that could be 5 touchdowns at, easily at that point. A couple of field goals, those kind of things. But they've got to be able to move the ball, like, for damn sure, right? And I think Quinn's got to play a Catch. I think he's got to play the best game of his career. I know that might sound like crazy, but to a certain degree, because he's only in game 2. But whatever a 5-star is supposed to look like, and you always have these stats. I think Quinn's got to look like, while their games are different. You remember when Caleb Williams came in for Spencer Rattler last season, and how that offense just took off, and it was like, yeah, Caleb hasn't really played, but look at what look at what this offense looks like. I think that's what it has to look like. Again, their style's a little bit different because Caleb loses his feet, but he's got to be able to get that momentum, take a team on its back, and play like, a high 5-star is supposed to play like the number 1 recruit in the country was supposed to play like that. That to me is probably the best comparison that I can think of. Something like a Caleb Williams performance.
Yeah, and I think that more than anything, in that type of just let your talent hang out and let it all, just let it be and see if the other team can match up with your talent. I think it just goes without saying that last week against Louisiana Monroe, his success in the passing game occurred fairly close to the Texas line of scrimmage, that it was a lot of not a lot over the top of the linebackers to that third level and beyond. You would think, there's a world out there where he throws 3 touchdown passes and none of them are air raid type plays. But in general, they've got to keep Alabama honest. And if you want Bijan Robinson to have a big game running the football, you've got to try to spread that Alabama defense out so that they can't stack the box. They're going to give Texas opportunities in the passing game for one-on-one matchups to go over the top. That's the area that it feels like Texas will be given. And if Texas starts scorching them, Alabama will adjust. But it does feel like going into that game, if I'm an Alabama defensive coach and I'm looking at where Quinn Ewers had his strength and struggles from a week ago, and you think about inside the game plan of wanting to make sure you stop Bijan Robinson first and foremost, Quinn's ability to connect with receivers down the field is a major component of a Texas win in this game. And if they can't figure out the downfield passing game even a little bit, because it really didn't happen a week ago, then it really becomes hard, I think, to envision this offense playing at a high enough level to compete with Alabama.
100%. To your point, the shot plays have to be there. Like they just have to. I think you got to start fast for sure. And keep that momentum going. Again, kind of like the start that Texas had against OU last year, where it was just like, oh snap, like what the hell just happened here, and keep it going where, I don't think any of us had expected that. Now the outcome's the outcome, but I'm just talking about what you want from a starting perspective. Like you want it to be like that hot, and you want Quinn to get hot, right? You want him to be hitting those downfield passes and hitting Xavier Worthy or Jordan Whittington and using some of that speed. Now, look, Bama got speed, right? So we understand that it's not ones versus twos here. This is ones versus ones, and in some instances, Alabama has more ones than Texas does. But yeah, it's going to have to be the speed stuff. It's going to have to be using Bijan in the run game, because look, if you're Alabama, you're telling yourself Bijan will stop, and then we'll see what this young kid can do, right? That has to be the plan. I think even we talked to Bijan about that yesterday, and I think he even understands that. All right, if they can limit him, they're probably going to put the ball in Quinn's hands and tell him, you have to beat us. You have to win the game. We're not going to let Bijan run for 250, 270 and go wild on us. And you're right, Catch. He didn't make a lot of deep throws last week. Against Louisiana Monroe, like we didn't see that deep pass there. It was all short underneath. It was almost kind of like when the interception happened. There was a play before that was kind of a bad throw. And then the interception happened, and then almost it's like Sarkisian reined it in. And it's like, hey, we're just going to start doing some of these other things, and occasionally we'll try to go downfield, and those things didn't work. So, but you can't hold back this week. I mean, this is this is one of those you gotta die on your sword at that point. You got to go swinging, but the last thing you can do is just play conservative against a team like this.
Yeah, Alabama's in an interesting position in that they're rotating their cornerbacks quite a bit. So they have their starting cornerbacks, but it doesn't include a guy like Eli Ricks, who was arguably a top 5 guy in the portal this past year and is projected as a first-round draft pick in next year's NFL draft. So Alabama's still trying to figure out what their corner rotation, corner outlook should look like. If you're Texas, the problem of not being able to have success down the field is it really does allow those Alabama defensive backs to cheat, to play those underneath routes without fear. And that should never happen against Texas, because when you've got Xavier Worthy on the field, if I'm a defensive back, I have to forever be worried that guy gets behind me. Yes. But if you're playing your offense in a phone booth and everything is short or in the intermediate, defenses won't be able to help themselves. They will start to crowd that box area. And that's, to me, where Texas has to be able to get out of that. Alabama's going to stuff the box. They're going to crowd the intermediate part of the field, and they're basically going to dare Texas to throw over them. Now, that's a dangerous game because Xavier Worthy is a guy that can murder you in your sleep if you are going to play around and dare him to run by you. But for the rest of that Texas offense, we haven't never really thought of Jordan Whittington as a pop-the-top kind of guy on the defense. Casey Kane last week caught a ball that he made a 40-yard play out of, but that was a catch and run. Mm-hmm. That wasn't throwing over the top. So what we really haven't seen is this Texas offense yet, show how to that they can throw the ball over the top of a defense to break them. That didn't happen a week ago. And then B, we don't know who that player would be if it's not Xavier Worthy. And you have to believe that Nick Saban will go into this game. He's going to want to stop Bijan Robinson, but player number 2 is keep Xavier Worthy under control. So if we live in a world where they're bracketing or they're doubling or they're doing things to Xavier to shut that off, it is a bit of an unknown to ask which other Texas players in the receiving game can be that guy that can make Alabama pay for putting so many guys near the line of scrimmage. Maybe Jatavion Sanders down the seam. Boy, you'd like to think that at least once or twice in this game, they can get Sanders matched up with a linebacker where he's going down the field. And then, it's weird. One of the first names that popped. This would have been a great Isaiah Nayor game. I mean, this could have been the Isaiah Nayor coming out party because of all of the focus going elsewhere. You have to challenge Jordan Whittington. Can you be that guy? Casey Kane, can you be that guy? And maybe, just maybe, Anwar, this is the moment where our guy, Ajay Hall, and his skill set comes into the equation. He doesn't play in the season opener, but boy, they dressed him. Hey, go ahead and get the experience of the stadium and warm-ups and all of that. That led me to believe he will definitely be in the mix for playing time against Alabama. And he's exactly the type of guy on paper that might be able to give Alabama fits if in the passing game they're doing everything they can to block out Xavier Worthy. Somebody's getting one-on-one coverage on the outside elsewhere to go down the field. Hall might be the best at that position remaining to be able to be that guy.
Well, I mean, here's the one thing we know. there's only one receiver on this team that has ever cooked anyone on the Alabama defense, and that's Jai Hall. Catch, I mean, that's only the one bona fide. You want to check a mark? We go back to that spring game, right, where Saban was, when everyone still loved him over there at Alabama, they were raving about what he was doing in that spring game and the performance that he put up. So he knows how to cook this defense. He knows how to cook those DBs, and he knows those guys. Like, if anybody knows the weaknesses, the tendencies, how a guy leans, like footwork, hip placement, all that kind of stuff, Jai Hall knows that. Now, again, we don't know how much he will play, but if you are Sark, you've got to tell yourself, man, hell yeah, I got to give this guy a shot, because he might be one of our best shots to do it. And it goes back to everything you're still saying, goes back to Quinn, but it was funny when you were talking about it, just made me think about how important it is to connect on the deep shots, because we expect him to be under a lot of pressure all game long. Like, we expect, like, every time he blinks, there might be a person in his face. We expect he's going to have to get helped up by his teammates quite often on Saturday. But when he does have a clean pocket and the look is there, he's got to make the throw. Catch. Like, it just has to happen. It may only be a few times a game that it occurs. It may be 8 times, maybe 10 times, maybe it's something to that effect. But when he gets that clean pocket, he's got to make that perfect throw. But to your point, using a guy like a Jai, see what you have out of Jordan Whittington, anybody you think can get you some speed on the field, even if there's some Brendan Thompson sneak something in there where you're just like, hey man, just go. And let's just see if you can catch it 50 yards down the field. We'll just throw it up there and hope for the best. Things like that, that speed that Sark has wanted, Catch, and really desired in his receivers. This is the absolute game where you got to utilize it.
It's interesting. I historically I've always said about Quinn Ewers that as a high school prospect, he's the most accurate short and intermediate thrower I have ever seen. I mean, his ball placement in those areas is just different than anybody else I think I've ever covered at the high school level. I've always questioned the deep ball to a certain extent. You'd watch at times at South Lake Carroll where on his highlight film, he would complete long touchdown passes, but a lot of time the receivers would have to slow down and wait for the ball, readjust their routes to a certain extent. It's harder to do that at this level and we saw the one deep pass that he threw to Xavier Worthy on first throw of the game. There's a window where Worthy is open, where the safety hasn't yet come over, and it just required a different type of pass from Ewers than the one that he threw. That's a long way of me saying, ultimately, we're talking about the guys that can get beyond the Alabama defense and put some pressure on them.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be up to Ewers to make those throws when those opportunities open up. And it won't be like on every play, Texas has a chance to hit a big play. It might be 5 times out of 75 offensive snaps where that moment presents itself. And he doesn't have to go 5 for 5, but he's got to be better than 0 for 5 and probably better than 1 for 5. You've got to be able to do it a couple of times, and it just puts the pressure on your young quarterback. You got to make that throw. I mean, bottom line, I watched the Clemson game last night, and 5-star quarterback trying to figure it out for Clemson. And a lot of times it's just the details, those downfield throws and the timing of them are really difficult things. And for Quinn Ewers, in a week's time, he just has to get a lot better at it than he was on Saturday against La Monroe, because even the most basic football fan could have sat in the stadium that night and said, oh, he overthrew a couple of guys when they tried to throw it deep, and it never quite happened. And it wouldn't require them to do some synopsis of X's and O's and trends and stats. And you can see that with the naked eye. And probably the last thing I'll say on this entire matter is, to the naked eye on Saturday, it's got to swing the other way a little bit.
Yeah. Let me ask you this as we start to wrap up, Catch. And we always talk, you always hear the things about, the age-old adage about young quarterbacks. You don't want to shake their confidence. You don't want to get them rattled or, things like that for the long term. In a game like this, if you're Sarkisian, do you worry about that at all? Or do you just have to let it fly and just say, look, if he's that guy, he's that guy. But is there any holding back, or do you just say, we just got to let it fly, dude?
I think you have to let it fly, but I think you have to let it fly with some caveats that protection-wise, what you can do against Louisiana Monroe in protection to set up a deep play is different than against Alabama. Those rushers are coming. It will not be a sin if Kelvin Banks gets beaten by Will Anderson a couple of times on Saturday. It's going to happen. That dude may actually be the best player in the country instead of Bryce Young. And if Kelvin Banks is holding him down, then you got to worry about that Dallas Turner Christian Jones matchup on the other side. Alabama's going to win some. And I think that you're going to see Texas try to get the ball out of Quinn's hands quickly. So I think we will see jet sweeps and we'll see throws into the boundary. You'll see them try to make it easy on Quinn to build up some confidence. B, it gets the ball into your playmakers' hands to see if they can maybe make a play. And C, when you do that, you mitigate that Alabama rush because they just don't have time to get there. But there will be moments when you're not just throwing it in a phone booth, when you have to trust your protection and trust that Quinn is going to make that play, and it has to happen a couple of times in every quarter. It needs to be 6, 7, 8 times over the course of this game. They really try to test Alabama. But when you do that, you're playing with fire, and that's where turnovers can potentially happen as well. That is the game inside this game. I don't know that you worry about that so much with Bryce Young. Texas has to worry about it. Texas doesn't bring anybody in this game, with all due respect to even Barron Sorrell or DeMarvion Overshown, where Alabama's like, if we don't do this, this guy's going to make us punish. He's going to punish us for it. Alabama's got like 5 of those dudes. And so if you're Texas, you not only have to play at an elite level, but you need a lot of guys to play at an elite level to hold off Alabama's elite level players. It's what makes this game so exciting. It is trial by fire. And I think, know that in order for Texas to trial by fire to win this game, Quinn Ewers has got to match Bryce Young pretty closely toe for toe. Whether or not that can happen depends on so many things that everybody's crystal ball can't foresee 5 days from now. I mean, we think we know, we think it's possible, but we don't know. It's kind of one of the things that makes Saturday so intriguing. I can't say that I fully know what the hell's going to happen.
No, we don't. And that's the other thing, Coach. My closing statement would be, it's college football. I mean, that's the crazy thing. There's always that unknown factor where just when you think, I got this, I figured it out, college football is saying, gotcha. So there is no unknown. There's so many unknowns. Like we might be doing a show next week, Catch, and we're talking about Quinn Ewers, that 5 touchdown performance, and how he's never going to get his car towed again, right? And
it's not outside the realm.
We don't. Yeah, you just we can never say never. So I'm looking forward to it. So that's kind of my parting thing.
What do you think the stat line will look like on Saturday for both quarterbacks? Leave your comments in the comments section. Would love to know what you think of both Quinn and Bryce. There aren't many 5-star quarterbacks in this country, and 2 of them will be on the field Saturday at DKR in one of the most memorable home games in the history of Texas football. Hey, do us a solid. Like this video, even if you didn't like it. Like it. Subscribe to the channel. We'll have more videos throughout the week. I'm going live. We're recording this on Tuesday. I've got my show tonight, OB at night. We'll be talking more Texas and Alabama. Onwar's got the Drunk Uncle show tomorrow evening as well. We will not stop. We never stop. The content always flowing here on the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. Until next time, you guys be good to each other. We'll talk to you soon. Later.